When a group of miners excavates in a quarry, they discover something shocking. They look closer and instantly turn pale. The site supervisor, Glenn, stared at the expanding pit where an excavator was digging, wiping his brow with a dusty sleeve. His gaze followed the machine's strong arm as it tore into the ground, producing a pleasing crunch in a stream of dirt and pebbles. Suddenly, a hollow, muffled thud came from the ground beneath the excavator. Raj, a miner with hawk-like eyes, looked down into the pit next to him and whispered, "Something's wrong." The sound from the quarry caused an abrupt, unsettling halt to the site, which pierced through the mechanical din like a whisper from the shadows. With a furrowed brow, the machine operator, a big man named Tom, looked up and shut down the excavator. Glenn raised his hand to ask for silence. The miners around the quarry froze, tools in midair, conversations interrupted in the middle of sentences as if the wind had held its breath. A tense silence fell over them, so deep that the distant cawing of crows sounded like a menacing chuckle. "Wait!" Glenn's voice was authoritative as he shouted, stressed by the unexpected event. With Raj right behind him and their boots sending tiny boulders into the pit, he scrambled down the rough slope. Tom leaned out of his cabin as they got closer to the excavator, his eyes wide with confusion. "Glenn, something is down there." Tom faltered, his usual bluster giving way to something fragile, almost shattering. He gestured haltingly to the spot where the bucket had stopped, half buried in the ground. A strange shadow seemed to slither in the sunlight as the ragged, torn ground yawned open. A few other miners sat near the edge, looking down, their interest turning to an unspoken fear that shook the team like a current. Raj took a step closer, his eyes narrowing and his brow furrowing as he tried to interpret the shadowy figure that was rising from the dust. With slow, deliberate movements, he reached down and used his gloved hand to sweep away loose dirt. What followed was a low, guttural creak that echoed up their spines and through the bottoms of their boots, a sound they had never heard before. The ground trembled beneath them, causing an almost imperceptible tremor that made Glenn's neck tingle and the crew's heartbeat increase. "Everybody step back!" For a brief moment, Glenn's authority faltered as he gave an order. Raj's eyes grew wide, and he felt as if someone had reached up and taken his breath away. His boots slipped on the rough rock, and he collapsed into Tom's extended arms. Pale as chalk, the two looked at each other before turning their attention back to the yawning wound in the ground. With hands and machines motivated by fear and morbid fascination, the crew worked with an almost frenzied precision. As miners cleaned the loose gravel and rocks, Glenn gave them orders in a hoarse but steady voice. Tom carefully steered the excavator, its metal arm now quivering with every scoop, as if it could sense what lay underneath. With shovels, Raj and a few others scraped away the dirt to reveal what had been concealed for an unknown amount of time. With each swipe of their shovels, more of the mystery was revealed. The distinct skeletal outline of metal, spots of faded paint, and rivets shining dully. It took a moment for their expressions to light up with comprehension. Questions that the crew was unable to fully formulate spilled into the heated silence as murmurs shook the site. "What is that?" Raj's voice was barely above a gasp as he murmured. His wide eyes remained focused on the emerging structure as he wiped sweat and dirt from his forehead. Tom mumbled, "I don't know," as he jumped from the excavator and landed roughly on the stony ground. He rubbed a palm over the rusty metal in disbelief and stepped closer. An insignia, letters hardly readable after who knows how much time of decay, gleamed weakly in the sunlight beneath layers of dirt and rust. As the excavation crew looked at each other, their initial astonishment turned to something more disturbing, the knowledge that they were staring at airplane debris. At some point in history, the ground had completely swallowed them up, keeping the account of what had happened hidden until now. The collective trance was broken when someone yelled, "What are planes doing buried out here?" Glenn stared at the mangled metal, a thousand ideas running through his head, the question hanging heavy in the air, unanswered. There were no airfields in the area, and he was unsure of any wartime documents that mentioned such a thing. At last, he uttered the command, barely above a whisper, "Keep digging." The crew obeyed, but this time they moved slowly and respectfully, each shovel clang accompanied by the creaking of metal that hadn't seen the light of day in decades. More planes appeared as the minutes stretched into hours, their shapes mingled like fallen birds in a silent, sorrowful embrace. A sense of dread crept into their bones as the breeze now carried a chill, as if the past itself had exhaled. Regardless of the tale these planes told, the miners exchanged glances full of mutual awareness that they might wish it had stayed buried. By late afternoon, the quarry had been transformed from an industrial site into an accidental archaeological dig. Without a doubt, a multitude of decaying airplanes, their metal fuselage interlocking like pieces in a horrific puzzle, lay before the miners. Glenn's expression was one of wonder and discomfort as he stood at the edge of the pit. Around him, miners had stopped working, too absorbed in the scene. While some merely looked, others whispered, the shock gradually giving way to a deeper understanding of what they had discovered. Tom's comment finally broke the silence that had descended like a veil over the situation. "Looks like a graveyard." He spoke softly as if raising his voice would frighten the long-lost ghosts bound to the wreckage. With a somber nod, Raj stared at a faded symbol that could have once been the insignia of a vanished squadron. They had dug up planes. Their stories were locked in rust and ruin. Their once proud wings had been separated and broken, and twisted metal frames, stripped of their former might, lay entwined. They couldn't fathom what had brought these planes here, what sadness had been absorbed into the silence of the ground. With the weight of what they had seen bearing down on him like the sky itself, Glenn took a deep breath. He looked at his staff, looking for signs of enthusiasm, anxiety, or anything else that could tell him what to do next. A new era of aviation for military operations began in 1973 when Australia received a fleet of medium-range interdictor and tactical strike aircraft. For years, these planes became an integral part of the nation's aviation infrastructure, flying countless missions. With their engines thundering across the skies from busy cities to the far-flung outback, they served steadfastly in both emergency and peacetime operations. By 2007, the aircrafts were nearing the end of their useful lives. The once proud fleet was retired and placed in storage as newer models with improved efficiency and cutting-edge technology took their place. Debate over whether to sell, recycle, or use the fuselages left their fate uncertain for a while. Then, in 2011, the Australian government surprised everyone by deciding to bury the aged fleet of planes. The final resting place was chosen to be a remote quarry away from prying eyes, and the planes were meticulously buried, hidden under layers of stone and earth. Fear swept through the quarry as more of the wreckage surfaced beneath the meticulous excavation. As Raj wiped the dirt away from the distinctive cockpit markings and structure, the miners looked closer and instantly turned pale. Raj muttered, "It's the F-111 fuselages." The group exchanged terrified looks and fell into a startled silence. Once written off as mere rumors, the stories they had heard now loomed ominously before them. The Australian government buried the planes in 2011 to protect from asbestos, a dangerous bonding material widely used in their construction. When the miners discovered this, they were shocked and retreated, their astonishment giving way to a spine-tingling fear. With their discovery confirmed, the miners wasted no time. Under Glenn's urgent orders, they worked quickly and carefully to rebury the site, sealing the dangerous relics under layers of earth and rock. The weight of what they had uncovered, retired F-111 fuselages buried by the government to contain their hazardous asbestos, weighed heavily on them. Once the site was secured, the crew gathered their tools, exchanged silent, pale-faced nods, and moved away from the pit, leaving the buried planes and their toxic legacy once again entombed in silence. Have you ever unearthed something that was a piece of hidden history? What would you have done if you were in the miners' shoes? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to share any personal stories of hidden discoveries. Thank you for watching this video. Catch you in the next one.